in the chat to Will, and we'll make sure that we get we get your comment at about 2:20, and we'll start off with roll call. Will, if you want to go for it.
Sure. Did everyone see that we're recording now?
Oh yeah, I can see that.
Cool. Yeah, so I'll do a quick roll call. How about Jared? I saw Jared. Uh,
Um,
John,
Here.
Frank,
I'm here.
Stephanie, Cameron,
Here.
Amanda,
Here.
Steve, okay, Todd,
Yep.
Stephanie, Macmo, Stephanie.
Here.
Thank you. Steph Castaneda. Okay. Um, Ed. I think Ed would be out today. I see Todd now. Okay. Tony,
Here.
uh, Brian, okay, and Stephanie Mendenhall. Hey,
Here.
thanks. Also, from our agencies, Sharon, who also I think might be in and out, and Craig. I thought I saw Craig.
Here.
Okay, great.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I'm here, but I might have to pop out for LFO stuff.
Oh, hey, Sharon. Tony, you want me to put up the agenda real quick?
Uh, sure. Yeah. Our agenda, as always, will have a little bit of time for director and staff updates, and then the bulk of our time is we're gonna focus in on our strategy around expanding access to recovery community centers and recovery spaces. Really today, focusing in on the beginning of a recovery community center slash spaces definition. Me, Will, and Stephanie Cameron, mostly Will, scoured some existing concepts for us and put those together, and we gave a little bit of feedback, but really want to give Will a shout out for doing that. And we'll dive into that today. And then last, we'll have public comment. And so, Will and Annalise, if you want to kick us off with some directors' updates, that would be great.
Thanks, Tony. I will try to be brief, but I am going to share a couple slides during this portion that will hopefully help set the stage for you all as you go through the Recovery Community Center conversation. So quick updates. The commission had a hybrid meeting this month in Salem, which was fun. Was that just last week? Oh my gosh, you guys, it was just last week. Yes. So we met on Monday. The Oregon Recovers Rally was on Thursday, which was amazing. It was good to see a lot of you there. Some good coverage of our recovery high schools. And the Harmony Academy students put together a life-size board game to represent the youth experience in the system in Oregon, which was awesome. And I highly encourage other folks to kind of bring that out in the future. They did a really good job with it. We heard from OHA at our February meeting to talk about the behavioral health resource networks and kind of what the thinking is as we move forward on the burn funding and what they're planning. Next month, as a heads up for folks at our full commission meeting, it's going to be another OHA month. I promise we'll have different agencies coming soon. But OHA is going to give an update on the rural health transformation grants. Some of the initial phase, we're working with them on some school pilot work, which is very exciting. So that's next month. The opioid settlement board, I think this happened since your last meeting, or maybe it happened. No, I think it reported out to you all last time. In January, the Opioid Settlement Board decided to go ahead and allocate $13 million of this biennium's allocation to help close the gap for the behavioral health resource networks, which I know many of you are feeling the effects of. We closed it by about half. It would have been close to 30% if we would have allocated 13 million. This next month, at the beginning of March, the settlement board is finally going to get to what we were hoping to get to in January, what we're going to do with the rest of the allocation for this biennium. So more to come on that. As always, those meetings are public meetings. This next one will have some small breakouts, but public members, remember, can always hop into those, and I'll keep reporting out to you all on how that's going. So there's the Opioid Settlement Board. Talk quickly, ledge update. We talked about this at our last commission meeting. We did an update in our Friday newsletter. Very high level. I think most of you know that we're more than halfway through the short session at this point. So they only have about 2.5 more weeks to go. I think it's fair to say that most of the legislation that we were pretty concerned about has not moved forward. And if anybody wants to kind of talk offline, or if you need more information, I can send you what was in our newsletter. We continue to watch a couple things that are sitting in Ways and Means and Revenue. And there's some healthcare bills moving forward that may change or push some things forward or hold some things up. So we continue to watch those. But that's a great segue into, I wanted to share with you all briefly, attached to your calendar invite today is a slide deck called Policy Advocacy 101. And I apologize to the commissioners in the room or any agency staff that has heard this 1 or 2 times before. We shared this with all of our commissioners and talked about it at the commission meeting. And then we're also talking to each of the committees about this, just so everybody understands what the role of the commission is when it comes to advocacy and lobbying when we're kind of in the midst of session. Well, you can go ahead and go to the next slide. And I'm not going to cover all these slides, so please refer to them. There's also links in the slide for nonprofits. Those of you that are with nonprofits, hopefully you know that you have guidelines that you need to follow if you're a 501c3 when it comes to lobbying. So, what does it mean when we say advocacy? It can be a number of things. Well, will you go to the next slide? So, kind of the big things I think we're all familiar with is public education. So raising awareness on issues with the public, grassroots organizing, coalition building. Next slide. And actually, well, why don't you just go ahead and go down to slide 7.
I don't have numbers on my screen, so if you could.
Keep going. There you go, that one. So this is kind of, you'll see in the first column, different types of advocacy and what those are and what the ADPC can do. So we can provide public education if a legislator reaches out to us. We can provide them with information. We can, in the interim, we'll be presenting more about the comprehensive plan. We can support coalition building. So that is something we've done to, when folks are trying to organize around something, make sure that they're connected, that the right agency people are there to answer their questions. But we can't really lobby ourselves. If you can go forward to, that last one. So we can't lobby, meaning we can't support or oppose a specific piece of legislation. However, with the governor's permission, we can respond to legislators' questions around a topic, provide data upon request when they're considering a piece of legislation. We can provide feedback on budgetary policy. You can go to the next slide. We also do talk a lot with the governor's office about what the consequences of bills will be, just to make sure that everybody is really well aware. So we can do a lot kind of in the background. We can take a position on a bill, but it has to be at the direction of the governor. So we kind of have an internal process we have to go through in order to do that. So go through, next slide. So what does that mean for you all as members of the committee or commissioners? It does not in any way restrict you or what you can advocate for. You may have some separate requirements with your agency, or many of you are parts of associations that lobby on your behalf. That it does not in any way prohibit you from any of that activity. We do ask that if you want folks to know that you're an ADPC member or you're talking about some of our work, just let them know. I'm not here on ADPC's behalf. I do know that they have this work and their recommendations happen to be the opposite of what you're doing, or in support of what you're doing, or whatever you want to say. Just make that clear. But you can do, it doesn't restrict you in the least. Next slide. So a quick example of this, and then we can take down the slides, and I'm going to talk about getting ready for 27 and kind of forward planning for bills. So a good example of this was House Bill 3321 last session in 2025. So there were a group of prevention advocates who are on one of our committees, and some of whom are commissioners. Tony, I think you were part of this group too at one point. Who approached a legislator about primary prevention and getting a bill together. And so, the legislator asked us, will this work? Kind of, what do you think of this? And that bill was passed. It wasn't a governor's bill. We didn't come out and take a position on it. The governor didn't take a position on it. But the bill passed, and that bill actually was included in the comprehensive plan. So we did kind of take it and say, okay, this actually furthers the comprehensive plan. And we worked that work into what we're doing. But we didn't ever take a position on it or anything like that. And the members testified on their own behalf. So that is just an example of kind of the push and pull there. Wes, Will, you can take the slides down. And I want to spend just a couple of minutes about 2027, because I think that's going to might be relevant to this group and the conversation you're going to have today. But are there any questions about kind of like now, or what happens during session with the ADPC? Or Tony, if you want to add anything, I think Tony has done a good job navigating this over the years.
Yeah, sure. So the benefits of having the alcohol and drug policy plan, with its broad input from stakeholders, right? We had hundreds of people participate in the development of our strategies from various sectors, and now we have a plan that makes sense to mostly everybody, right? Like on the recovery subcommittee, we got recovery centers. What are the peer practices, recovery friendly workplaces, and recovery housing, right? So the benefits to the people in the community who've been like calling for these things is now it's solidified in a state plan, right? And your participation in that doesn't exempt you from pointing to that thing that is really important, right? And it's something I've done over the years. It's like with the OHSU gaps analysis, for example, that the ADPC was a part of, saying like, here's a snapshot of where there's deficits in our system, right? And advocating for those services. But what I don't do is say the ADPC says you need to do this, and so it's just being able to walk that line very closely and being explicit about it. So if I'm testifying at the legislature, I usually name my credentials, and one of them says I'm the chair of the ADPC, but I'll say, but my remarks here don't represent the Alcohol and Drug Policy Commission. you know, and so that's as simple as it is and as easy as it is. So you just have to be careful and walk that line.
That was perfect, Tony. I kind of look at it as like this is just part of us all rowing in the same direction, right? And we do our part that we can do at the ADPC and convening and setting direction and setting policy. And then there's parts that advocates, need to do. I think the Oregon Recovers Rally was a perfect example of that, of like individual stories. We can set policy, we can bring numbers, but it's always going to be those individual stories and people showing up that are going to, tell legislators that something is important. So thank you, Tony and Bo, for another wonderful rally. So real quick, I just want to talk about looking forward. And I don't know, I'll call it an advantage of being in state government. So you can't approach the governor, you all can approach a legislator and say, I would like you to introduce legislation on my behalf that does such and such. The governor doesn't, that's not how it works with the governor. We have a pretty lengthy process that we are about to embark on in the next month. Yes, it's very early. To start planning for the governor's budget and the governor's bills for 2027. So I know everybody's in short session. We're looking forward to 2027. So we do, of course, as an agency, have the opportunity through OHA to propose legislative concepts. An example that we're exploring a legislative concept right now with a couple of our agencies, some old legislation that needs some updating that applies to several agencies. We're working with them that we might propose a legislative concept. The way that works for agencies, we have to put it on a list basically by April 1st. So it's really early. We have certain requirements that we have to follow and direction from the governor and the Department of Administrative Services. So probably won't surprise anybody going into 2027. Agencies really can't be asking for additional funding. If they need funding for a program, they have to find savings to offset it elsewhere. So really looking at things that are efficiencies, moving policy forward. I say this to this committee because I think one thing that we've been talking about is, do we put forward a legislative concept with the definition for recovery community centers that you all are going to start talking about today? That's part of the reason why there's kind of, we're like, chop, chop, tell us what you want, because we do have this deadline. We have time over the course of the year to work with legislative counsel on the drafting. We don't get drafts back until the fall. The governor herself doesn't decide until the end of the year, really, what she's going to introduce, what maybe sometimes she says to agencies, I'm not going to introduce this, but you can go and find another sponsor for it. Or maybe she says, this isn't going to make the cut this year. So it's by no means a guaranteed pathway, but I just wanted to share that process with folks. I know it's super wonky and administrative, but being like really transparent, that's one of the things we're thinking about as you guys start the conversation you're going to have today. So that was really long. And I'm going to be here through the whole meeting if people have questions later. But do folks have any questions about that kind of, so how does advocacy work? And then what does it look like if we do want to put forward a concept?
Just to clarify for everyone, Annalise, okay, let's say that this body today reaches consensus on RCC definition. Okay, it's clear, we know what we want. And then our request of the ADPC is to pursue a legislative concept. And then process-wise, you would go to the governor's office first and then go to a state agency to submit that legislative concept on the ADPC's behalf. Is that right?
kind of. It goes to the state agency. I mean, ours gets submitted basically with OHA's big batch
Okay,
because of
gotcha.
where we sit. And then eventually it'll come to the governor to decide kind of what direction she wants to go. So we're very early in the process. It's just, and we can put a placeholder on the list and then later say we changed our mind. We don't think this is the way to go.
Okay. And it sounds like from what you said, direction state agencies have right now is administrative in nature and not fiscal. And so if we did want to make a request, it wouldn't want to be $25 million to fund recovery centers throughout the state. That's unlikely to make it through.
We can't, I mean,
Okay.
under our guidelines, we
Okay.
can't do that. You all could go to a legislator and ask for that, but we can't.
Yeah. All right. But we can, without a legislative concept, give some direction to state agencies based on on how we define something, right? And does that need governor approval?
We would probably share that with the governor's office to get her sign off. Like we've done that with other
Yeah.
things that we've done through the ADPC, but that's absolutely one option that we could do, as soon as you guys kind of come to an agreement, and just say, like in this example, send a memo to all the agencies. This is the definition that we're using for recovery community centers. If you fund services like this, if you could make sure that it falls within the parameters, let us know, things like that.
Great. Awesome. Okay, that's exciting stuff. But first we got to figure out what are we going to define, and then after we define it, which I don't think is going to take very long to do, then we get to move into the fun part on how we support it. Exactly. Cool. All right. Thanks, Annalise. Any other questions from anybody from Annalise? Okay. Will, you got some slides prepared for us?
I do. Okay, I think we should be good now. Yeah, thanks, Tony. And I know you mentioned we're focusing on recovery community centers today and definitions. But I still wanted to give a refresher on a few ADPC items, including the strategies that the recovery committee finalized in their work last year. So just, yeah, I mean, what is ADPC? Establishes state policies and works with state agencies to improve access to these substance use areas. ADPC shall develop a comprehensive substance use prevention, treatment, and recovery support services plan for the state. And that's what we're working on. It's the 2026-2030 comprehensive plan. So there are three overarching goals in this, plan, and those are to reduce substance use disorder prevalence, which is about 1 in 5 Oregonians has a substance use disorder, reduce substance use related deaths, and in 2023, that was over 1,700 drug overdose related deaths, and more than 3,000 alcohol related deaths in 2022. And lastly, reduce disparities. And for American Indian, Alaska, Native Oregonians, the death rate in 2023 was 110 per 100,000. And that's compared with a statewide rate of 43 per 100,000. So those are the things we're up against. That's what we're trying to move those figures as we embark on this plan this year. Just a refresher, the ADPC has 5 committees: risk reduction, prevention, treatment, youth, and recovery. And if you want information on any other committees, just let me know. Okay, so here are the recovery strategies, or at least the four topic areas associated with the strategies. So it's recovery community centers and recovery spaces, recovery housing, peer services, and recovery friendly workplaces. So we're working on that top one today. I'm still going to buzz through each one of those just as a refresher. So expanding access to recovery community centers and recovery spaces. Like right now, we know that there are definitely more than 10 recovery community centers in the state, but there's no real directory. And sort of like depending on definition, some of these might be included in that definition and some not. It's like how many recovery community centers do we have in Oregon right now? Well, that depends on the definition, which we do not have. And it's a similar case for recovery spaces, and recovery spaces being probably something that overlaps heavily with a community center, but maybe there's a few elements that keep those from being exactly identical things. But of course, we still want to expand and fund those as well. So yeah, some steps. We kind of broke these into near term, midterm, and long-term steps. And near term, let's just say it's like the first 2 years. And in a bit, I'll get into our work plan, which is meant to happen in the first 2 years. But at a high level in that near term, we want to define RCCs, youth RCCs, especially or specifically, and recovery spaces, and include how these overlap with the continuum of care, which I'm sure we're going to get into in a little bit. Sort of midterm goals for recovery centers, plan to expand RCCs and recovery spaces, and a readiness analysis of what areas of the state are ready for this to happen. Yeah. And long term, we have this aspirational goal of at least one RCC or space operating in every county, for increasing recovery capital. So our second big strategy is standardized peer support across the system. And when we say that, we're not talking about like developing new competencies or anything like that. It's more contacting and communicating with providers or really anyone who touches on peer services, and providing educational materials and what the role of a peer is, and so that with the goal of enabling peers to do what they're meant to do in whatever situation. So near term, talking about releasing guidance documents on peer support services, and standard of effective peer work made clear across all levels. So peers are not asked to do things that are not within their role. Come midterm, spaces delivering peer services will have uniform reporting requirements from state agencies to demonstrate alignment. And long term, those providing services demonstrate improved outcomes. So we have a third strategy, and that's to ensure adequate recovery housing. And this is a really big strategy, and so I kind of condensed it a little more here. But things that we're looking to accomplish: promote a regulatory framework to ensure recovery residences operate under recognized standards, nationally recognized standards. Education and outreach activities to reduce stigma and local NIMBY issues. Want to support landlord education and awareness, and in collaboration with Oregon Youth Addiction Alliance, expand recovery housing to be inclusive of housing for families. So just a few near-term items associated with the recovery housing. We want a work group to recommend a regulatory framework. So again, this is in the first 2 years. And we want issue briefs developed on the importance of recovery housing, expanded opportunities to connect landlords through public awareness and education, and then an assessment of youth and family-oriented housing. And a few more items on midterm. Okay, so a recovery-friendly workplace strategy 4 is a business or organization that has adopted a plan to create a culture more accepting of people in recovery or seeking to learn more on recovery. And right now, we're just going to be using our capacity to kind of gauge community interest in this. What do employers want? Okay. So this is our recovery committee work plan for 2026, and a few items blend into 2027 as well. So these are more of the details of what we're going to do to accomplish those near-term goals. So in by the end of our March meeting, so that's next month already, we'll have completed a working definition of recovery community centers. That's key because in April, two recovery representatives are gonna present to Oregon Youth Addiction Alliance on what recovery centers look like for adults. So we can begin working back and forth on these common items, including recovery spaces. And then in May 2026, the recovery committee is going to present to RCC leaders at the RCC summit in Seaside. And Tony, I'm going to ask, we can talk about that in a couple minutes. Actually, at the end of this slide would be good. After that summit, summer 2026, we'll finalize definitions of recovery centers, begin definition of a recovery space, which follows naturally after we've established a definition of a recovery community center. And then begin work evaluating needs this is the part Tony was talking about, is sustain current capacity. This definition allows us to move in that direction. And so you might ask, what are we doing for recovery housing and peer services in the 2026 work plan? So as things are, ADPC staff is going to gather information on recovery housing throughout 2026. We'll be working with partners, agencies and such to learn more about recovery housing and figure out what type of work group we want to establish in 2027 to do the work on recovery housing. Similarly, staff is going to connect with key partners at OHA and MACBO to gather information on peer services for the peer services element. And that's going to be brought to the committee in late 2026. So right now is definitely, a time where we're emphasizing recovery community center work. And that's sort of like what we're doing the first half of this year. Tony, I'm wondering if we want to talk about the summit in Seaside, because I don't know that everyone knows about that.
Sure, yeah. So, similarly to how I think we can approach some of this work similarly to how we approach the ADPC overall planning process, where we have some subject matter experts that are bringing forth concepts, right? And then we go and get some, community feedback, right? And to sort of put the final stamp of approval, make sure we didn't miss anything. And we are fortunate that we have a couple of things working in our favor. One is um, synergy with our state agency partners. At OHA, the Office of Recovery and Resilience, had already been working with Eric Martin on developing some peer best practices. Eric's developed all sorts of various peer best practices from youth to child welfare, gambling, forensic, etc. and they asked him to develop a recovery center best practice manual, and he's currently working on that. And then the peer company, which John's here, they have their big peer conference every year, and it's massive. And working with OHA Public Health, they had pitched the idea of being able to hold a mini summit during that time for some recovery center leadership to convene and review the best practices and the ADPC recommendations. And so we want to leverage that opportunity to take this subcommittee's recommendations to do a once over final to make sure we didn't miss anything. You know, we do have several leaders in this group who run recovery centers, and that's great. But as Will was identifying earlier, there are other people out in the community who do as well. And so it gives us a good opportunity to shop our product with the broader community for accuracy. And then in addition, to build synergy in what we're trying to accomplish. And reviewing what we went over with Annalise, there is some levers that the ADPC can pull, but they don't have all the levers. And an additional important lever that we need to pull is the community support. And we're much more flexible as a coalition and what we can accomplish together outside of the ADPC. So it'll give us a good opportunity there to talk to some other recovery center leaders about like what is something that we can do in the future to make sure these things are funded. Because right now, from what I can tell, and correct me if I'm wrong, the funding in the future looks a little fragile. So it gives an opportunity to also talk about that and build some community, which is going to be really important as the budget cuts become closer and closer, so that we're not tearing each other down when we should be working collaboratively together towards a larger goal. So that's my little rundown of what we're doing there. And thanks John and the peer company for being willing to host us. We appreciate that.
Can you talk a little more about the makeup of that group that's gonna meet?
Yeah, the idea is we want to bring recovery center directors or leadership there who have the most subject matter expertise to do the final review. So that's would be who getting the invite to go.
Gotcha. So lots of people on this call.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, Tony.
Yeah, and if you know somebody who runs a recovery center after going over the definitions of where we're moving today, then please let us know so we can invite them because I know a lot of them, but I don't know everybody.
Sounds good. Okay, now we get to move into actually the definition portion of the meeting. So we identified last year that this definition is crucial. And so moving into that, there are a few questions we figured we'd want to know. We're not going to answer these right now, but just sort of like keep in the back of our mind, and we'll address them again after few definitional slides here. So questions like, I mean, it could just be as simple as why do we need a definition? Why is it a problem to not have one? What does it mean to have a definition? What is the target population? Will it go into statute like Annalise talked about? Is this our recommendation to state agencies, or is this what we use in our own work exclusively? And then also like where are RCCs in the continuum of care? What do we think about recovery spaces? Something I didn't put on there is that do we have a definition on like our website, for example, that's really nice narrative, wordsmith? Is that something different than might be presented, or a minimum requirements like in statute? Like, so anyway, I'll bring this back up when we start discussion. That said, feel free to jump in anytime.
Okay, cool. And so you want to go to the next slide, Will?
Yeah.
Uh, so just a little backstory here, and then Will, you have the 3 slides with the kind of underlying foundations and sort of where we arrived.
You. Yeah.
Okay, great, cool. So we looked at what currently exists. I don't know if you guys are familiar with it, but the Recovery Research Institute, really great thing out of Harvard Medical School, and I think it's in collaboration with another institution. I can't remember right now, but they are fully dedicated to researching recovery. They started a few years ago, and the really cool thing about them is that historical academic research has really been into the causation of addiction and the efficacy of treatment interventions in the short term. But then the Recovery Research Institute really started studying more about recovery, including some of the impacts of recovery. And one thing that they took on as a very specific thing to study was community recovery centers. And they've started that initial studies. They've done some stuff with the National Institutes of Health. I got to present to them a couple of years ago. So we looked at what did they come up with, and you can kind of see it here on the slides. And then you want to go to the next slide, Will. And then of course we got SAMHSA, who actually, I think in the 80s or late 90s, a group of recovery advocates came together to define recovery centers, and they had a summit about it. And one of the things that was really clear in that is that they wanted it to be separate from clinical treatment. It was a real concerted effort to do that. And so SAMHSA has a definition on what recovery centers are. And so we looked at those 2 definitions, and then we kind of threw together a third one. And I'm gonna pass it over to Stephanie Cameron to kind of talk about the core elements that we think are included in a recovery center.
Thank you, Tony. So some of the things that we discussed should be key to recovery community centers. And I wanted to say something actually before we went into this, is that every community is going to be unique. Every recovery community center is going to have its own amount of resources and availability. And then, of course, there's the community need. And so where not every recovery community center might be able to have every single one of these aspects, there needs to be kind of a mixture of these, whether it's through staff or volunteer opportunities. The one that the very first one, and the one that we saw pretty clear in the other one, in the other 2 definitions, is that it should be non-residential. It should be peer operated. Usually a paid director, and I think that piece is really important, because whenever you're trying to run an organization, you need to really have somebody who's dedicated to that cause, and having a volunteer director just isn't really going to provide the amount of work that's necessary. Recovery community centers can have a mix of staff and volunteers. It could be drop-in, and it could also have a drop-in center. So those 2 things could look really different, whether it's drop-in services or a drop-in space. It should be offering peer support and recovery coaching, host mutual help meetings. And so one of the other definitions, it wasn't just recovery-oriented meetings, but meetings for families, meetings for survivors, really that holistic wellness when it comes to long-term recovery, especially when we're talking about substance use and how it really is, it's a family disease. Advocacy and leadership development, of course, that also entails strong professional development or workforce development opportunities. There should be resource navigation, social activities. One of the things that is really important is that a recovered lifestyle, we kind of need it to look fun. And so social activities, there's a wide variety of social activities that can be entertaining and engaging, in addition to recovery meetings. Connection to employment, education, and social services, fostering relationships, building that core support network in the community. And then all of this together, along with a lot of other opportunities, build recovery capital. The really cool, I just wanted to state, the really cool thing about recovery community centers is that, we do have, boundaries, and we're still bound by some, organ administrative rules and the way that we deliver services. But it's a really beautiful opportunity because the possibilities are almost endless. It's like, what can I think of that's going to help, and how can I establish that within the organization?
Yeah. So just a couple things before we open it up. One thing that we were really mindful about is that each population that's served at a recovery center is going to be different. And so we wanted to be broad enough that the general activities, services that are happening at a recovery center can be manifested that best fits the community, whether that's, culturally specific community, rural, like whatever. But at the same time, be specific enough that we can say in the continuum of care with prevention, reduction, treatment services, this is what the recovery center is. This is how it's different, and this is why it's important. And so I just wanted to preface with that, and then open it up to what people's thoughts are on these general services that would be, recovery center foundational.
And then we're back into discussion after this slide. Would you like me to leave this slide up for
Yeah,
discussion?
yeah, yeah. Let's leave it up and just hear. I mean, there's some people who run recovery centers in here. Like, did we get it right? Did we get it wrong? Are we missing something? Other people who are in this committee know recovery as well. We would love your feedback, and if it's good, let us know. If not, you know what I mean? Let us know. So Stephanie, go ahead.
I think this looks really good. I actually really love this list. Everything that's on here, we do here in Medford. Um, I'm glad you mentioned the culturally specific piece. I think you're right. Like that kind of needs to be determined by the center or the community they're serving. So putting it in would not fit very well. I really like the advocacy and leadership development. We have really worked on creating avenues for our clients to move into leadership and then into the workforce. And then that's really helped sustain peer work in Medford. Seeing people on their day one and then get their 2 years and then get certified and be circle leaders and then move out into community jobs has been really powerful for us because those are like our people and then they're working in other agencies, which makes the partnership stronger. So I really love those pieces, but I don't really can't think of anything to add. Great job, you guys. I think it looks amazing.
Thanks, Stephanie. Um, Stephanie Mendenhall, go ahead. You're co-chair. You can jump anytime you want. Anybody can jump in anytime you want. Really.
Well, I had a question. One thing that we have experienced here is we set kind of like I don't like the word screen, but it kind of is because we're not unhoused services. So here in Eugene, we require individuals who are accessing any level of services at Restored Connections to identify as having a history with substance use. So that really kind of narrowed some of the scope for individuals who either don't have a history with substance use disorder, because there are other services that are really tailored more for their unique needs. And it also kind of set the stage that if people are accessing services here, that we're going to be talking about substance use. We're going to be talking about changing our lives in one way or another. The history with substance use really opened it up for people who are in long-term recovery, who have had some life experiences. You could have been on a really strong recovery journey and life happens, and now all of a sudden your foundation is a little shaky. Maybe you've lost a job, lost a loved one, maybe something has happened. And you're not at a place where you're going to necessarily engage in a treatment provider or maybe you're not even at a place where you need to engage with a treatment provider, but what you do need is that support. Maybe you've stepped away from your identified recovery program, you're looking for something different. And so I don't know if that's something that needs to be here in the definition of a recovery community center, but I know that our experience is it's really tailored the work and the individuals who are accessing services to people who have been personally affected or have a history with substance use.
I just want to call it, Stephanie, that is such a good point. One thing I would urge folks in the committee to think about is that element of like, what's not a recovery community center and how do you write this in a way, right? I think it's going to be, I think it's really important that the preamble of
Yeah.
whatever we put together is very clear who this is for. And maybe it needs to say who it's not for. I don't know.
Yeah, I think you're right, and we need to define the population that we're serving, and then we need to articulate where in the continuum of care do recovery centers really fit, right? Um, and so that is something that we those are future next steps to do. Um, but before we do that, anybody else on the call have any feedback about this foundational program framework that we've brought forward?
I just wanted to say that I appreciate the elements and the definition here. One thing that our organization is facing in more of like rural areas is a lack of understanding or exposure to what recovery centers are.
Yep.
And so at the beginning of the first 6 months of us operating, it had a lot to do with like community education. People were sending individuals over that were in immediate psychosis or a mental health, dilemma. We were getting people that were just sending, homeless individuals over to our center. And then we had individuals just accessing our center that weren't in a place where they were wanting to go ahead and work on recovery, right? Like it was just a warm place that was inviting where they can grab a cup of coffee, and having to go ahead and have those conversations with people and be like, hey, like our recovery center is here for a very specific reason. Like, is this what you're ready to go ahead and do in your life? Do you need a referral to a different agency? So I greatly appreciate how you involved building recovery capital into the definition, as well as, there are other elements that we can go ahead and provide. But all in all, it comes down to like, how do we build that recovery capital? And I think the definition also gives us a way to kind of, jump off and say like, hey, like these centers can't be run on a shoestring budget, right? Like they need a paid director, they need staff, they need people that have the professional development to go ahead and deal with a crisis or deal with individuals that are, at their lowest part of their life. And so I think the definition does a really good job at that. And I appreciate it.
Cool, thanks. So, Will, if you'll just entertain me real quick, could you just pull up an empty slide? We're a little bit ahead of schedule here.
All right, give me 1 second.
Okay. So I think we have enough time right now to spend about 10 minutes where we could brainstorm um the population that we're trying to serve and where where in the continuum of care is a recovery center placed. And we can just brainstorm, we'll take notes, and then before we come back in March, we can get like me, Will, and Stephanie will get together, we'll wordsmith it and bring you back something in March and maybe a preamble too that kind of says what is it that we're trying to accomplish? What are these things? You know what I mean? And then Amanda, I love that you flagged the community education part. I can't remember if it was Will or Annalise who brought that up, but one thing that ADPC can recommend is, or what we can't do is we can send out a communication on what recovery centers are you know what I mean, into the ether, into the system, into state agencies, so that they know, so that you don't end up like I've ended up before, where it's like you have Unity, right? You have people going into Unity, and then Unity is just sending people to 4D who are in acute crisis, and we're not equipped to handle it. Like we're not, nor is it the ideal place in a community space with a bunch of random people there to send someone in acute crisis who may get more elevated and aggravate, community members and stuff like that. And I've seen all sorts of stuff in recovery centers. Um, uh, True Colors has had some colorful stuff over the years. So if you guys were gonna quickly say what the population, what are some characteristics of the population? Jared, haven't heard from you at all, which is weird. Are you okay?
Yeah, I'm perfectly fine. I'm working on some stuff and listening at the same time.
Okay.
I would. I'm sorry. I don't have the ability to raise my hand. I'm like on the.
You're okay.
Well, I don't know where it's at, but I would say that like when we're looking at people that are a best fit for the center in early recovery, I would say like they need to be within like the contemplative preparation stage of change, right? Like understanding that they have an issue and maybe weighing the pros and cons of recovery and then preparing for recovery into action.
Okay. And even before that, you'd say, I think everybody agreed. They're people with a history of substance use issues, right? That's our primary population, or co-occurring mental health. But substance use is the primary thing bringing them there, who are engaging in the recovery process. Um, anybody else around population characteristics? Sharon, go ahead.
I don't know if it's a characteristic, but and you all forgive me, I'm still new to this group. I think, Amanda talked about getting referrals and sending people from Unity, but I also think that there's this piece of self-initiation, like self-referral, like people are wanting to access recovery services, which I think you capture in that contemplative preparation stage. But one of the things that we used to talk about a lot at CCC when we had all these different arrays of different kind of housing is, people self-initiate to go to detox. They self-initiate to go to treatment a lot of the times, not all the time. But that's one of the pieces that I wanted to call out is people that are, yeah, really self-referring or, really wanting to engage or at least contemplate engagement in these services.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay, Todd, commitment to abstinence, meet criteria for a SUD. Okay, we'll throw that on there. The only hesitation with the criteria for SUD that I would say is, if somebody is in remission, right, and they're graduating treatment, they're kind of in remission. At what point do they not meet the criteria anymore? So
Yeah,
that would be my only consideration.
that's a definite thing. Or we could even say that they meet or have met the criteria for substance use disorder. But then that also the other danger in that is that somebody would require a diagnosis, and
Okay.
I don't want that either. I think you can meet the criteria without necessarily having a diagnosis, if that makes sense.
Like self-identify with a past history of substance use issues and substance, something like that. Yeah, that makes sense. Other people.
Hey, Tony, it's Frank.
Frank, what up, Frank?
So I'd say commitment to recovery instead of abstinence.
Okay. Yeah, the absence one's a tricky one. I get where Todd's going. And then that's how like at 4D we've kind of handled it. Like, are you taking steps to improve your recovery, or are you just lounging on the couch, using the charger, eating the food, um, watching explicit videos on the community computer, it's like all sorts of stuff, using in the bathroom, constantly without making any effort to improve your situation at all. And that's usually where we've drawn the line. So appreciate that. Um, anything else on the population? Okay. And then I'm gonna propose something and I'll give you the rationale for where we're at in the continuum of care in a very general sense. So, uh, working with people, and I like this preparation stage of change, but also the action, you know, like if we just say contemplative preparation, like we are going to be serving people who are in action stage, and that's really important because where I see recovery centers really maximizing their benefit, and I'm not saying they don't benefit in other places, but really maximizing state investment is when acute interventions no longer needed. That's like the ideal place, right? Peer-led CRMs, PS running it, right? Recovery focus. You don't have to have psychiatrists there, stuff like that. And so I would say that is the position that they're in, is at that, end of treatment episode, or if you use the um, sort of where they at in their stage of change. They're in the action part of it and don't necessarily need the acute care. And that doesn't mean that those things don't happen simultaneously. But ideally, people who are getting in their recovery and feeling good about it in a good spot, they're going and chilling at the recovery center, working on life goals, life skills, what recovery pathway they're going to have, how they maintain their job, how do they improve their relationships with people, how do they become a better parent, how do they expand their professional development, how do they get in the workforce? You know what I mean? I would say that is the most efficacious use of funding in a recovery center. And I don't know how to articulate that, but that's my pitch to y'all, and I think it's beneficial for the clients. And then I think there's a really solid argument for funding outside of the other sectors to do a very specific thing that would differentiate it and allow for it to be resourced well. Sharon, go ahead.
Are you kind of saying, like, I think people come in at first at that contemplative stage, but at some point, if recovery centers are able to provide, supported employment, access to the, Social Security, disability, volunteer opportunities, that at some point they're making their way through some of these goals to, I think self-sufficiency looks different for everyone, but that they are accessing at least minimally or some of the services that this recovery center is offering to people to move along the continuum.
Yeah, I think that can happen. What I think the ideal world would look like is people, like a large segment of people sort of exiting treatment,
Yeah.
being able to have a spot to go
They
after
need
that.
more support, but not,
You're like, when,
yeah,
what I mean, that ongoing
yeah,
continuum care. Now, people are going to walk in and want some help, right? Or people who don't ever use treatment, they're going to
right.
come in and want some help, or they're going to come to a meeting or a mutual aid group, or something the community is going to invite them, right? But how do we articulate where we're at in the continuum of care so that we're not a homeless shelter.
So the idea isn't this is everyone's first stage into recovery. This is like in addition to
Some
or
other
next
stuff. Yeah.
steps.
Yeah.
Okay.
John, go ahead. And I'll get you Stephanie.
Yeah, I think that's a great assessment or placement on the continuum. I think it'd be important to call out kind of what Sharon was talking about, I think, is what's the pre-step and that low barrier day center or whatever it's defined as, and really calling that out to show the separation. Because I think, like we said, people are going to stumble in, there's going to be that, opportunity, but to really present two different models or showcase two different models to be able to show the difference that this is a recovery focused after secondary type program, long-term program. This isn't the low barrier in and out like a day center type setting.
Shelter type thing. And that maybe that goes back to Annalise, your point is coming up with some things that it's not, explicitly, which can help differentiate it. Thanks, John. Stephanie.
Yeah, I was just going to mention, like, depending on how it's framed and like what lens we're looking through, right? Like, we help a lot of people get into detox. And so people know if they show up here, we're going to coordinate them into detox. But we have no availability when they're in that state. Like, they're not in a state where they can sign an informed consent. Like, they can't even come into formal services, right? So we offer that because it's the right thing to do. We offer that because somebody is coming to the center knowing that they're not going to be turned away, that if they're actively seeking help accessing detox, it doesn't really matter how they present when they show up. They can present however they are in that moment. That like window of opportunity and that desperation to do something different, like we really value that experience. And so I think that I don't know how this would, how we would put this into words, but I do think that that's a really important piece because we've seen a lot of movement in that detox coordination. Now that person then goes to detox. They sometimes reach out to us helping for coordinated care into a treatment facility. And then we're there for them after they've finished their clinical experience and now they're transitioning back into this very same community that they were using in. And one of the things that really kind of rings true for me is I can't quote the evidence. I'm sure there's somebody else here that can quote the research, but it's about 18 months, from the moment that they've accepted the help or made that move into preparation till somebody's really secure in their recovery. And for some of us, it was more than that. But I think that 18-month window, that's research that's been done. And I think that's where the recovery community centers can really have a strong leg to stand on because that's all aftercare. That's all recovery supports for that entire time. And with all of the reauthorizations that treatment facilities have to do. And I know that their stays continue to get shorter and shorter based on like Medicaid reimbursements and the CCOs. Recovery community centers are really here to meet that gap. When somebody's, next 30 days didn't get approved, we're here to make sure that they're not falling through those service gaps.
John, go ahead. You have your hand up one more time.
Yeah, I just want to say I think a lot of this reverts back to the person seeking recovery, whatever that looks like, and their willingness to engage, right? And I think that's where, when Amanda was talking about drop-offs or I was, we get that like from other counties sometimes, like hospitals will drive them to our building, like, what's going on here? Like this person doesn't even want to be here. And so I think that, some of that can be avoided if we really the person seeking recovery, no matter what stage they're in, and they want to be there and engage in service. I think those two things eliminate. Now, we're not going to prevent those other things from happening, right, but I think having that strict criteria really at least gives us something to say. These are the requirements, for people to be brought here, sent here, for them to come, whatever that looks like.
Because that the huge utility of the recovery centers is the social model of recovery and having all the people there who have strong recovery, who've changed their life, right? But if you fill it full of individuals not ready there, right? Or it's a crisis center or something, then those people don't want to hang out there. And to some degree, it becomes a safety issue. And I've ran through that through the years. You know, my board at one time they told me to stop, letting people stay the night at the center. I used to let people stay, and I would stay there with them because they were like so close to getting into detox, and I didn't want to let them leave. And then anyways, and so I would like stay the night so I can make sure people got to detox the next morning, or tried to run like a night shelter, for some people a couple of times, but I ran into a bunch of problems. So all right, we got 6 minutes. Anybody else have anything to add? And then we are fortunate because we have Wordsmith Will, and he's gonna help capture this and put something together for us to review.
Jared's hand is up. It's
Oh,
blending into the yellow on his wall.
Jared.
So when we created the native SUD peer best practices, there's a difference between older and elder. And sometimes when like the older, they're not knowledge keepers or carry, the cultural piece. And we have a lot of our elders that have been drinking for 20, 30 years, right? In the streets in that pre-contemplation stage, but they've been able to come to the center and like be a part of it, see people like them, hear the drum, partake in being a part of their community to where they've found like healing and they're in recovery now. So I don't want to miss that piece for the community. Like, and I like the commitment to recovery, and abstinence is always the goal, especially in the native community, because when we're abstinent and we connect to ceremony and culture, like that is the drive of Painted Horse. But in that pre-contemplation stage of our elders that have been drinking and having that struggle, that's huge, right? And since we're like last to access to treatment, like basically like in the US, like somehow capturing that stopgap because of the recovery centers and like the cultural aspect, that if they're engaging in Painted Horse and they keep showing up, even if they're still using a little bit, they keep showing up and they get that piece, and then we get them into treatment. And then in like I like what you said about the active stage, because the active and maintenance stage, that's where all like the magic happens and they rebuild their life. But like somehow capturing how important it is to have a recovery center in between that getting into treatment, because we're so bad at it in Oregon, getting people into treatment, like, or last to access and care, and like two different dynamics, kind of like what John said, like two different dynamics, like separating it, but yet accentuating both models. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like the seeking recovery, engaging, and coupled with program, the foundational program element of care coordination, right? Like those two things together seem like the perfect mix, right? So you can say, hey, look, looks like you're, acutely intoxicated, right? Here every day. We want to help you. We got to get past this. Can we take you to get an assessment, right? Because we can't just have you drunk here all day. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. Or, we have some concern about your medical, complications. Like let's move that. And then, if the person's willing to do that, then it's, hey, this is a spot for you, right? And then going back to what Stephanie said, like we spark people's motivation, right? And they come in, we spark it however they get there. And then oftentimes they come back around to us later, and it's like they're home. And then they're there and they're part of the community. And then when other people come in, they're there to spark the person's motivation, the new person. So it sounds like we're all moving in the right direction and on the same page. And so we just have a couple minutes here before public comment. Is anything else that we haven't covered?
Wanted to, I didn't get a chance when the slide was up. The slide with the bullet points and those like whatever 10 or 15 elements we talked about. I just want to give a shout out to Eric Martin too, who was really helpful in developing that slide. You mentioned, Tony, that he's working on some RCC best practices, and we got to have a talk with Eric, and yeah, a lot of that was sort of informed by that conversation. So thanks to Eric.
Yeah, shout out to Big Brain Eric, Eric GPT before I had chat. I don't call him as much anymore. Um, okay, cool. We got 1 minute, but I just want to open up for public comment for anybody who wants to weigh in. Okay, and then Shira, I would just you're a commissioner, you run treatment, it from your perspective and in your experience, does it sound like we're on the right path?
100%. Yeah. I super appreciate the conversations around like low barrier and staying away from diagnoses and remission and just, keeping access kind of broad. So yeah, absolutely. I think we track.
Okay. Okay, cool. Will, Annalise, anything else? And Mara, I see Venn diagrams, some comparative models to differentiate it to make it clear. When we do our sort of education part, I think that's smart and that's great. Here's sobering versus recovery center. Here's, shelter versus recovery center. Here's treatment versus recovery center. And that's something that I have slides I created like 10 years ago that I still use today to show the difference. And one of the main differences that I articulate to um, mostly the treatment providers and stuff is the let's call it the service episode in clinical treatment is driven by a clinician and it has a prescription, right, attached to it, right, for a level of care. And then the recovery center, there's all these different services, and the person prescribes themselves. They sort of diagnose and prescribe themselves how much they're going to go, when they're going to go, what they're going to participate in, the different opportunities. So a person could go 7 days a week, all day long. You know what I mean? They could go to 5 different meetings. They could start like whatever, you know what I mean? They could participate in whatever at the frequency that they want, in accordance with their goals and their lifestyle and their beliefs. Where in treatment, that's not the case. You can't just say, I'm going to residential today, and you can't. You have to get an assessment and a diagnosis and then a prescribed treatment plan, which is great. And I think those things are great. They work for a lot of people. But I think that is the distinction. And I was a little nervous about how the conversation would go because I care so much and been running recovery centers. But I was able to tailor that and just listen. And you guys all articulated the same exact stuff that I've said for years. So that's just really affirming on that we're on the right path for me. Anyways, so great. Well, if there's nothing else, then I would propose we adjourn early and get back to work, our regular work.
Did we give one last call for public comment?
One last call.
Just to make sure.
Yeah. And I think what we should ask Annalise and Will to do, really what we should leverage both of them for, is wordsmithing our concepts in a way that makes a lot of sense. Will's absorbing a lot of information, not only from us, but he's doing a ton of research on his own. And I really appreciate you doing that, Will. You're a great researcher. And then Annalise is an attorney by trade, so a recovering attorney. So she can help us really wordsmith some stuff that doesn't have some unintended consequences, which is something that I've run into with putting something into legislation before. when I was just really excited to get it through. And then there's a bunch of problems. So we'll be asking for you guys' help, Annalise and Will. Okay.
I'd like to say something real quick to Wikipedia. Thank you for all the extra work that you put in Wikipedia and wordsmith and all that good stuff and doing all that research. We'll call you Eric Jr. or Wikipedia. Either one will work.
Call her Anna Legal. Okay.
That was better than Wikipedia.
All right. Well, appreciate all you guys. Thanks for taking all this time. It'll be fun when we start shooting this stuff out to state agencies and stuff. So appreciate it. And again, John, thank you guys at Peer Comfy for hosting something in Peer Apocalypse. Really appreciate that.
Thank you.